Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to today's esports webinar entitled The State of Esports and Gaming in 2021. My name is Patrick Buno. I'm a marketing manager with BIA Advisory Services, and I'll be running the webinar for you today. So quickly, as always, we'd like to give everyone else a few minutes to log on and get settled. So as they're doing that, I just have a few quick housekeeping items to go through with everybody quickly. I'd like to start off by reminding everybody that we are recording today's webinar, and that all registered attendees will be receiving an email from BIA with links to the on-demand version of the webinar, as well as a PDF of the slide deck. So keep a lookout for that. If at any time during today's webinar you experience technical difficulties, please email us at webinars@bia.com. We have staff that is standing by monitoring that email so they can assist you if they can. And then finally, we just like to encourage everyone to be interactive in today's webinar. So if at any time you have a question, please just go ahead and type it into your questions box on your GoToWebinar panel. We're going to try to get to your questions today at the end of today's session, and if we don't have time, we'll be sure to follow up with you separately after that. So I think with that, we're going to get things started here. I'm going to hand it over to one of the moderators for today's session, the Managing Director of BIA Advisory Services, Rick Ducassy. Rick, take it away.
Patrick, thank you so much, and thanks everybody for joining us today, both audience and speakers. We have a really exciting topic today. Esports has been pretty much the sports scene over the past COVID period here. So a lot of exciting developments in this part of the media space and audience space. And we've got some fantastic speakers to share their experiences, insights, and data with us. A moderator for today's session is Zach Oscar. How you doing today, Zach?
Hey, Rick.
All right. Sure, so I'll turn it back to you, Zach, in a minute, but just to kind of set a little bit of context here. Yeah, so esports has definitely been a bust-out category in the sports programming. It brings very targeted audiences, and there's, 5 or 6 different paths to monetization in terms of revenue streams for this category of business, esports. We'll get at some of that. But as advertisers are seeking to find audiences in different big pockets of the public kind of sphere, esports has just come up as a terrific forum for making that connection. Enthusiastic, fan-based phenomenon, and it's a great place for advertisers and sponsors to reach those fans. It's also a place to reach some of the younger demographics that advertisers and agencies are having trouble sometimes in regular traditional media platforms. Next slide. So we'll talk about those kinds of topics in this panel. And from a local media perspective, we're seeing more of engagement from local broadcasters and their clients looking at esports. And esports, for those of you who don't know very much about it, it's a legit thing. There are actual athletes that make actual paydays. There are actual audiences, and there's a lot of different paths to monetization, as I was mentioning. It's not just a virtual thing now. There's actual venue-based, actually, in the COVID days, that's a big challenge. But part of the esports business model is definitely venue-based, as well as media-based and virtual. So we'll get into some of those kinds of things. Next slide, please. Esports, fast-growing audiences, those hard-to-reach demos, incremental revenue streams. And from a local media perspective, we see some of the media companies actually sponsoring franchises, owning their franchises in some of their markets. So it's really rolling out as a major phenomenon, kind of fast growth. It's already substantial mass now. There's some very interesting directions that esports is heading that we'll hear in this session. So next slide, please. I am now going to turn the panel over to you, Zach. Zach Oscar, who's been a specialist at esports, an aficionado, and I believe an esports player yourself. All yours, Zach.
Yeah. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. Welcome to all of the attendees and the panelists. Again, really appreciate all these people who I consider friends for joining in and agreeing to be on the panel today. If you go to the next slide, I'm going to give everybody a little 30-second spiel for introduce yourself, tell them a little about yourself. Nick, let's start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Very nice to talk with everyone and be on this panel. I feel honored to be on with all these fantastic folks in the industry. Just real quick, my name is Nick Branuevo, and I head up gaming partnerships for Samsung Ads, which is a division within Samsung that was started about 6 years ago to really focus on the smart TV platform and now mobile, and how we look at reaching audiences through media and technology and content services. And it's I have a background that goes way back to the Microsoft days of early Xbox, early video, CTV. I had a stop at Machinima in the heyday years where I really had nice exposure to the emergence of the influencer and in gaming, and working with some fantastic partners in the gaming space, and then at Warner Brothers as well. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you, Nick. Next, please. Paul.
Hi. I'd echo what Nick said. Definitely honored to be on the panel. I know some of you, we've been on panels before together. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at a platform called Rival. It's a B2B enterprise software fan engagement tool, really designed to help what we're thinking sports teams and organizations better engage with their fans, better monetize through gaming and esports. I've got a little bit of a schizophrenic background between traditional sports and esports. I spent time at ESPN and Warner Media, but I also spent time at Samsung, actually, long before Nick. And then most recently, I oversaw brand partnerships and sponsorships at an esports property called ESL.
Great, thank you, Paul. Next. Dave.
Okay, hi everyone. I think I spent the better part of the last 20 years figuring out how brands can interact with gamers in a positive, enjoyable manner for players, but also in a beneficial way for brands. So I've probably done everything from building some of the most complex advert games for brands like Nike and Coca-Cola and others, to doing a lot of in-game sponsorships in titles across Electronic Arts, where I headed up advertising, sales, and sponsorships and partnerships. So games like Madden, no relation to me, unfortunately, FIFA, Battlefield, titles that are really big platforms to reach gamers. And then more recently did a lot of work around bringing brands into the esports activities across the Electronic Arts franchises, including those sports games and games like Apex Legends, which are really popular. And recently joined Simul Media, where we're really focused on bringing TV quality brand advertising into HD video games. And AE would be console, PC, and doing it in a way that's super player friendly and something that they want, not something they want to avoid. And that's always, the tricky part about integrating brands into and around video games, is doing it in a way that's authentic and beneficial to the players.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that today as well. Next. Nicole.
Me. Hi, everyone. Excited to be here today. My name is Nicole Pike. I have spent about the last 14 years in gaming and research, gaming and esports research and measurement. I most recently, about 9 months ago, moved over to a company called YouGov, which, if anyone is unfamiliar, is a large global research and data company, and I'm heading up our global esports and gaming sector, and really just continuing my mission from my prior years at Nielsen of building out robust, accurate data in the esports space, because I've seen firsthand how much data can help to bring investment and sustainability into gaming and esports. So very excited to be the data nerd as part of today's conversation.
Great, thank you, Nicole. We need that. And last but not least, David Tucker.
I'm not going to let you steal the data nerd mantle just for yourself, Nicole.
All right.
I'm a data nerd too. Hi, everybody. David Tucker. I lead strategy for Magna. Magna is the center of marketplace intelligence and deals for all of IPG media brands. It's a role I joined just a few months ago, and very excited to be there because we sit at the confluence of all of the audience intelligence that our amazing teams at Magna are putting together and syndicating, and then actually taking that intelligence and turning it into deals that our partner agencies from to Initiative to Media Hub get to leverage. And I think today is a great time to be having this discussion as we head into the upfronts and start looking at the broadcast year for next year in a marketplace that is really, truly, honestly challenged to find some of the audience. COVID has shifted so much of everything, and now is a really great time to be thinking about ways to engage with platforms that can reach these younger, very, very valuable audiences. So thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, great. I'm glad that everyone's here. As you can see, great panel. So let me give a quick primer for the audience in case people don't know, so that we can have a discussion on a level playing field, right? Quick state of esports and gaming in 2021. Next, please. I like to look at the ecosystem in this breakdown, right? You've got publishers, games, game streaming, streamers, and non-esports and esports content that falls under all of that umbrella. So I'm going to take you through this really quickly. Next, please. Publishers, for those who don't know, right? These are these big game companies that finance the development of games. They're either in-house or they have third-party subsidiary studios. They develop and implement the go-to-market strategy, right? So any partnerships, activations, the sales, and they are responsible for reaping the rewards and or failures of their games. Next, some top publishers that you might have heard of, right? They rake in a lot of money, and there are some big games that go along with them. Next, please. Games, right? You've heard of Fortnite. You might have heard of PUBG. Globally, this past year, we had $180 billion worldwide in revenue, which everyone loves to remind everyone is bigger than sports, music and film industries combined. And there's mobile, console, PC games. You've got 2.5 billion gamers in the world, something around 55 billion in the US in 2020, especially due to the COVID boom. Everyone was gaming more. And 68% of people 2+ in the US play video games, right? And if you look at free-to-play revenue has really jumped compared to the traditional, oh, I'm paying $59.99 for a game, now $69.99 with the new gen consoles. Next, please. Game franchises you've probably heard of and all the revenue they've generated, big numbers. Next, please. Game streaming, right? Last year, this is how Facebook gaming, Twitch, and YouTube gaming did. Obviously, Twitch is a huge presence. It's the biggest market share in the scene, but YouTube gaming and Facebook gaming are experiencing a decent amount of growth. They generate revenue through their digital advertising that you're probably all familiar with in terms of banners and 15s and 30s. They've got subscription revenue. They've also got sponsorships and partnerships like Samsung actually just partnering with Twitch, for example. Next, please. Streamers, right? Everyone, this is a confusing part for everyone. They think, why would anyone watch anyone play games, right? But you've got these content creators on live platforms broadcasting to audiences, and they vary in content. For those who know ASMR, you know, like when people pop bubbles, bubble wrap on a stream, everyone's like, wow, I love this. Some streamers do that. Some make art, some play games, right? Some are big esports players and some are just casual gamers that people like to watch. A big difference here being that some play as an individual. So if I was Zach and I'm streaming, people say, oh, I want to go watch Zach, right? But some stream as a team. So there's many different esports teams and organizations that have entire conglomerates of content creators that people love to watch as well. Next, please. So what we just talked about was a lot of non-esports content, right? There's a big difference between what's esports and what's gaming. You know, you're going to hear everybody on the panel throwing around these terms, and you have to remember that gaming is this big box and esports is the competitive small box within the big box of gaming, right? When it comes to esports, it's the live organized competition component that's digital first format, which is to many people's points in their intros why we're talking about it. It's comprised of many teams and players battling each other, and it's akin to traditional sports, or at least that's what they want us to think. If you go to the next slide, here's an example of Riot Games with the creators of League of Legends. This is the system they're trying to build out. This is not my slide, they made this, where, you know, they're trying to say, hey, we are structuring our sport the same way that traditional sports do, so that it's a more easy point of entry, right? Next, please. Prize pools in these are pretty big, lots of money for these people to win, as someone was saying earlier, can be big paydays for them. Next. But of course, we're all wondering, right? What about advertising and sponsorships and whatnot in gaming and esports, right? There are all sorts of opportunities. There's sponsorships through leagues, streamers, events, and teams. There's native video with pre, post, 15s and 30s, mobile video, desktop video, digital advertising, and product placement. Let's flip through a couple of examples really quick. So you've got Red Bull doing a, hey, buy our cases and get a chance to play with a big streamer next. You've got Samsung and QLED, right, releasing a TV exclusively built with cyberpunk in mind. Next, please. You've got product placement, right? This is a big one. You've got NFL making jerseys available in Fortnite, and Louis Vuitton, which is a shocker, making custom skins available in League of Legends. Next. So Nicole was good enough to provide me with some of this data. And so for those who don't understand the breakdown, right, you've got gamers in the US, right? There's about 71% of the US population is gamers. 47% of them are strictly gamers, while another 17% watch streaming. 6% and a little bit more overlap as esports fans specifically. So there's a big difference between who's a gamer, who's an esports fan, but they're all part of the same gaming ecosystem. That's sort of the thing we're trying to point out to you here. And if you go one more, Nicole gave me some other good data to show before we get started. Here we have all sorts of interesting demographics about esports fans, right? They heavily over-index compared to the national population, especially in the 25 to 34 category and in the 18 to 24 category, right? If you look on the left there. So it's really an attractive young audience that has a higher income than most of people around those ages. They're educated. They have all sorts of different backgrounds. And so I think it's a great audience to be talking about. So if we go to the next page, we're going to get started with the panel. And so if you want to stop sharing the screen so we can see everybody more clearly, that's perfectly good too. If not, all good. Nicole, let's start with you. I really appreciate you giving me some quick data to share with the audience. Since I first met you when you were at Nielsen running the gaming research, you've looked to illuminate esports and gaming audiences for all these marketers and advertisers and enthusiasts. You know, in a quick, little bit, what's the importance of gamers? Why should we care about them?
Sure. So I would say at a very high level, most people these days are gamers. So first and foremost, gamers are important because the majority of at least in the US and our data shows pretty much everywhere in the world are gamers in some way, shape, or form, which means they're people that you need to talk to if you're a brand or marketer, because they're more likely than not in the market for your product at some point of their life cycle. But it's also, because it's a very broad group, there's a lot of nuance to kind of the different groups and areas. And as you start to go down the funnel, and you did a good job, Zach, of kind of outlining the different parts of the industry, but when you move down, especially to the esports fans, which is, there's obviously a lot of chatter, and rightly so, about reaching that demographic. They represent a lot of trends in kind of how media consumption is moving, especially in terms of very heavily digital, not owning or having cable TV subscriptions. So traditional forms of media are not reaching them, using ad blocker, kind of all these things that are kind of murmuring up from a trend standpoint, and will continue to expand across the broader population with time. They embody. But the great news is the ones that are engaged with esports are super passionate about it. So not only is it a place where they are and you can find them, but it's also kind of intersecting with one of the things that they love, which when brands and marketers also support that and do it in the right way, can be really valuable and powerful from an engagement standpoint.
Absolutely, absolutely. David, at IPG and Magna, are you guys seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think this is all about a story of where to reach a vital audience. And as we go into the upfront this year, we're looking at, I wrote this down beforehand, a 54% decline over the last 4 years in linear TV viewing for 18 to 49. So to think you can reach that same audience in the ways that always worked is just a fallacy. And I think people sort of understand that on an intuitive level, but when you look at the magnitude of figures, that's when it becomes that much more powerful. So let's put a 54% decline over 5 years in linear up against what what Amazon just reported, which is 73% growth in 1 year in ad revenue from streaming on Twitch. So clearly advertisers are starting to make the connection that this is where the audience can be found now, and starting to move dollars and attention that way. But there's still a very, very big gap to go between what traditional advertisers think about and how much they're investing in this very key audience.
Okay, I see you with the statistics. Trying to, you and Nicole. I see what you did there.
I'm taking notes right now. This is great data.
Great. Nick, along these same lines, is gaming content important to the OTT CTV world and Samsung?
Absolutely, yeah. And just to build on what Nicole and David have been speaking about, that's kind of how we at a high level are looking at our business, right? Is where we're seeing that shift to streaming, obviously, right? This year it sort of crossed the threshold of more people are streaming than watching linear on Samsung TV, and then you take from that our ability to capture real-time TV behaviors, but also gaming behaviors across our TVs and mobile devices, and how can we reach that audience in different ways, and OTT content is one of those ways, whether it's through our TV Plus free ad-supported streaming service or how we're reaching these gamers through different types of content experiences. And also even to build on your earlier point about the Samsung mobile marketing partnership with Twitch, right? Or what they did with CD Projekt Red, where they created content that aired on Twitch, but then on TV Plus. Those are all examples of how we're trying to, work across the ecosystem, sort of build the game ecosystem across the company, and work together to service this audience and meet them where they are.
Absolutely.
Can I challenge this just for 1 second, though? Because to me, I mean, everything that David mentioned, Nicole mentioned, sounds legit, and obviously Nick knows his business. But how much of it is COVID related, right? Like how much of it is a lack of content and traditional sports being broadcast, and how much of it is actual sort of deterioration of audience, right? Like I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, maybe Nicole, is there a COVID effect to what you see, and Tucker, is there a COVID effect to what Magna sees in terms of a fall off?
So from my perspective, definitely. I think we've seen from every which way that we've looked to measure what's happened with both gaming as a whole and then consuming gaming content and even esports. There was definitely a COVID effect, especially on gameplay hours and the percent of the population that are gaming. I mean, we've seen the sales of gaming consoles just be through the roof, higher than expectations, demand outstripping supply, all that good stuff. But my perspective is that there will likely be a slowing of kind of the speed of acceleration that we saw, just because, to your point, Paul, like part of that was there was a void in content. People had more time at home, less social activities, not at school as much, kind of all of the above. But we really also believe that part of what happened was it was just accelerating a trend that was already kind of consistently moving and sped it up a bit more. So my thought is it's maybe 2 steps forward, 3/4 of a step back kind of thing, which the net, of course, means that there's still growth happening. And I think it presents a great opportunity to all the content providers out there. They have the audience now, and the challenge is on them to retain them as other things try to grab their attention again.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think we think of the macro effect on all media consumption of COVID as merely an accelerant of trends that were already in place. I mean, everybody was talking about the shift from linear to streaming for the last 2 or 3 years. But I think the magnitude of the effect, COVID took the kind of growth we'd expect to see over 2 to 3 years and made it happen in 1 year's time. But what's interesting to us is like behaviors that are cultivated in these difficult times tend to have stickiness. And so as let's just even think about going back to work in a physical workspace. I'm looking forward to it because I'm tired of being at home, but at the same time, I'm looking forward to not having to go into the office 5 days a week, doing something like 3. And so whenever we're faced with these kinds of global shifts that accelerate trends, a lot of the behaviors that we learn become really sticky. So yes, it's a long-term trend, but it got accelerated really fast.
Yeah, and if I can just build to that, sorry, just with one additional stat, Paul, and I think you're right, to challenge it for sure, because I remember the meme, like in whether it was the beginning of 2020, where esports in 2019 wasn't really considered sports, and then in 2020, once the pandemic hit, it was considered the only sport for a time, right? Where linear advertising, ESPN, Fox Sports, etc., were airing esports, and on just to speak to from the Samsung platform, right, our footprint perspective, we saw a significant spike right at the beginning of the pandemic, probably about the first quarter or two, in terms of gaming usage overall on our platform. And then we sort of saw it to taper down, but then we saw it hit sort of a new plateau, and that's kind of how we speak to it, is it sort of spiked and then came down a little, but it's a new plateau versus where it was before. And we continue to see it sort of incrementally rise from that point.
Great, yeah. I think along these lines, right, Dave, simulmedia is not only is linear TV, but also now working into expanding into gaming, right? And so tell us a little bit about the approach to connecting with gamers at simulmedia.
Sure. I think the COVID impact is an interesting topic, but if you go back a couple of years pre-COVID and just look at Fortnite as a singular example of the potential of gaming, what you saw happen in 2017 when the game became a free game is that hundreds of millions of players migrated into a game that became their social infrastructure, and that was all pre-COVID. I had 2 high schoolers at the time that Fortnite really popped, and I watched an entire sophomore and senior high school class of boys and some girls, frankly, on Fortnite, who stopped hanging out together and went home to play Fortnite so they could put their headsets on and communicate. And so that experience really precedes what's happened with the stay-at-home environment we've been in for the past year or so, and it's certainly accelerated. But what really has happened is the accessibility of content. So if you have kids in the middle school age right now, they're all on Roblox or Minecraft. I mean, that's what they're doing. And so to David's point about linear TV decline and reaching audiences, I think, David, you said 18 to 49, but if you took that down even younger, what you would see is that they don't even know what linear TV is. That they're not on their cable system watching TV. If they are on a TV set and it's not playing video games, then they're on the TV set on a streaming service, which most likely is not ad supported because it's going to be their Netflix or Amazon Prime, most likely these days, at least in North America. But that trend overall means that for brands to meet this new consumer, and even going, let's say 13 to 24, you have to meet them where they are, which is either on TikTok and Snap and Instagram, and that's going to be a small format messaging and a different type of advertising and engagement with that player, or it's going to have to be in these larger format intellectual property environments. So whether that's in Fortnite with a great partnership that unlocks content tied to a brand like the NFL or Marvel or what have you, or it's going to be in environments like esports where viewership is engaged uniquely and really reachable in programming in that environment. So brands are going to have to figure out how to turn these environments into real opportunities. And I would say that esports, just going back a couple of years, was really a marketing vehicle for most game publishers. It was a way to drive deeper engagement, often with people that aren't actually playing the game, because things that are transpiring in esports means that are happening on television, and so you're picking up consumers who maybe weren't playing the game but now find it interesting and may become players of the game. And it's moving more from just a marketing vehicle now to really something that with leagues and professionalism becomes a money maker as well. And so that's a transition period we're in, and advertisers and sponsors are going to play a really significant role in not only establishing additional revenue streams, but also becoming co-marketing partners for these franchises and really driving overall marketplace awareness. So it starting to look a lot more like professional sports leagues in that manner, where the brands aren't just there to spend money, they're really there as a partner to help build up awareness and excitement around things like the Super Bowl or league championships. And you're seeing that happen in the esports world. So at Simul Media, we work with TV brands, hundreds of TV brands, and bring them into audience buys and performance buys, and we're now bringing them into the video game space. And I can tell you, the demand from brands is pretty significant to reach this next generation or up and coming consumer.
Absolutely. And I think really good, timely stuff about COVID here. And as somebody who's been a gamer his whole life, I've never owned cable myself. For me, being social gaming, some people are like, oh, you're gonna go game with if I tell them, oh, I'm gaming tonight, I'll hang out with you tomorrow, they're like, oh, you want to be by yourself and game. No, for me, it's that I'm playing with my friends. It's never that I'm just wanting to do it alone. The era of, to Dave's point, of single player centric console gaming is very much a small fraction of the amount of things people are doing in gaming. And so, there are two paths I want to go down now that about a bunch of things that you guys mentioned. The first is, clearly we're all excited about gaming. It's clear that there's an opportunity here. It must feel great to read headlines like esports is bigger than the NBA, because those are headlines are out there. Nicole, given that we both know that isn't quite true, is there good data in gaming and esports, and how can you discern the good from the bad?
Definitely. So, I'll be the first to say that there's good data, and that's a lot of what I've spent my last several years doing, both in terms of debunking what wasn't good and proving why, right, as well as trying to build up new and better data sources that are accurate. And I think one of the first things that I looked to, there's always kind of in esports, especially, this kind of view of, okay, there's something very unique about esports, and we need to find a way to measure and capture that. But then at the same time, there's also, to understand the size and the scope and the value of it, you also need to understand how it compares to other things that people are more useful and used to and familiar with. So things like being able to come up with a common viewership metric that you could compare to TV ratings is important, because at the end of the day, and I'm sure anyone on the call dealing with brands would agree, brands are thinking about esports and either their sponsorship portfolio or their advertising portfolio as one of many things, and they need to figure out how that fits in and compares with everything else, and frankly, what the opportunity cost of taking money away from something that they currently spend it in and moving it into esports and gaming is. And to do that, you have to have data that speaks the same language across the different resources. So yeah, it's not an easy job. I'll be the first to say that gamers and especially esports fans are hard to find on online panels and things like that, right? So you have to get creative, and you need to make sure the data is accurate. But I would say, probably more so for esports and gaming than anything right now, having that accurate data is really important, so that brands trust in moving into the space and spending there, because so many of them are still just unfamiliar with the industry. So anything that gives them pause or doubt could be the difference between investing or not.
Absolutely. Paul, we've talked about this, you and I as well, especially when you were running partnerships at ESL. How do you separate the BS from the true measurement of opportunity?
Gut instinct, I don't know. I don't have a very good answer. But yeah, absolutely. I think, not to sound like a curmudgeon, I think one of the hardest things for esports is that there's a lot of bad headlines out there, and people read those headlines. They don't read the articles, so to speak. And I think it becomes really challenging. And there's a lot of dumb money being pumped into the ecosystem that they don't really know what they're spending it on. I think a lot of these private equity companies and VCs, they're reading a headline that shows, BMW makes a major investment, and the reality is it was a local BMW dealership that paid a team to produce some content, right? Like it wasn't an actual global sponsorship. So I think it's a little bit of just making sure I call Nicole and find out what's real and what's not. It's a little bit of gut instinct. It's talking to you and understanding what this really looks like. People like Nick who are out there sort of spending money. But yeah, it's I think a really tough thing for esports sometimes when it's not probably what the headlines actually say it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nick, actually, I want to take it to you next, because is there a unique advantage for you through the ACR data that Samsung is getting about gaming audiences?
Yeah, I would say, you know, we're ahead of the curve in terms of how we were looking at how to leverage ACR and be able to measure what we're seeing from a gaming behavior standpoint across our TVs, smart TVs. Yeah, several years ago we started on that journey. So that has been incredibly useful in being able to combine, obviously, the way that we're able to leverage ACR just in general, right, across, you know, TV viewing behaviors and, you know, creating a real picture of who that consumer is, and being able to layer on and be able to work with game publishers and brands alike and be able to say, you know, we know what gamers are doing on our smart TVs. We know what games they're playing, what, you know, consoles are connected. You know, we know what shows they're watching. We know, you know, how to reach them and measure your advertising and media investment in terms of, you know, actual business outcomes. So it's been incredibly useful.
Yeah, great. And we're getting questions in from the audience actually along these lines where I want to go next. And this is a loaded question, so we'll spend a little bit of time here. Do gamers want to see advertising or not? Dave, you've been working on advertising to gamers for a long time, as you mentioned, right? Let's start with you. Go ahead and tell the people.
Yeah, so I wouldn't just say gamers. The whole generational shift that we're seeing is that people don't want to be interrupted or bothered or annoyed. They don't want to feel like anything is forced upon them. And it's not just in gaming. They really feel like the relationship has to be consensual, and that everybody's, gamers realize their time is valuable to advertisers and brands. So I'll give you an example. Integrations into video games need to be really authentic and beneficial to the players. Otherwise, they're going to go on Reddit and they're going to say, this is awful. You know, the game is abusing its privilege with me. And that spans, you know, frankly, the course of advertising as well. There are certainly completely free mobile games where players expect, you know, in between playing a word in Words with Friends, they're going to see an ad. But they know that they know they're playing the game for free and it's really fun and it's just part of the deal. But once you get into these freemium, higher production games, especially across console and PC and free-to-play games, players have an expectation in that environment that they're only going to engage with brands or see brands in their game that are accretive to the experience. And so I think the risk that brands are taking when they enter into the gaming space, and we've all seen, you know, examples of this, is not having experts to advise them, or not having gamers on their staffs that think about what they want to do and just trying to place media and get eyeballs. And really the most important thing is around this notion of value exchange, and whether that's you know, a brand that makes the gameplay more exciting, gives you a concert inside of a game experience, or it's just unlocking content for you that you otherwise might have to pay for. So one of the interesting things about this free-to-play game business, which is now the driving factor for revenues worldwide in gaming, is still a very small fraction of any game's players is spending money at any given time. Most players are playing for free and kind of grinding their way through to the added content experience, as opposed to spending money. It was a kind of a saying that holds pretty true. There's people with no time and a lot of money and they buy stuff, and there's people with a lot of time and less money and they play their way through. And I've seen that happen you know, across dozens of games. And so brands can interact there and they can play a role, but they need to be benefiting the consumer. And when they do that, I can tell you the brand health scores for the advertising are always in the upper right quadrant of their brand studies. Players love it. They go out and buy the brand, they get behind it. We see that in esports studies as well. Players really appreciate when authentic brands come in and sponsor an esports experience. So I'll give you an example. Pizza Hut, an NFL sponsor, we did virtual stadiums for them in Madden. So the Madden esports tournaments were all happening in a Pizza Hut virtual stadium, and players loved it. It really made them feel like their esport was being treated just like an NFL stadium, an NFL sport. And so that kind of stuff works incredibly well, but but not well thought out, or just shoving brands in front of gamers to get eyeballs is probably a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And you used a buzzword that I like a couple of times. You used authentic, right? And a lot of people think that I'm sorry, I'm in New York, so if you're hearing sirens, I can do nothing about it. A lot of people hear authentic and they think, so the computer brands and Logitech, like, the endemic brands that already exist within the space. Paul, to not only answering the question about do gamers want to see advertising, right? Also for non-endemics and whatnot, how does that work for them? Are they interrupting and not adding value? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think Dave hit it on the head. It really comes down to how can they be additive to the space, right? Can they create a better experience? Can they provide extra content? Whatever that is, it's obviously just when you're shoving an probably non-contextually relevant advertisement in their face that it becomes a little bad. But I think a lot of brands have figured out the way to be contextually relevant, not just in esports, but in any form of media and advertising. And I think when they do it the right way, you very quickly see a brand go from what everybody terms non-endemic to being endemic in the space, right? AT&T is one of the best examples I know, which when they came into gaming, everybody thought, well, they're in the NBA maybe, or they're in golf. Do they really belong in gaming? From a product perspective, 100%. And then from an actual integration perspective, they were very smart about the way they thought about their business and how they integrate into gaming and esports. And I mean, there's a list of brands that have done that, right? Mercedes and DHL and Intel and Pepsi. A lot of brands do it very, very smartly. I think the times that brands have not done it well, they get slapped pretty hard and then they figure it out. So I would say that, there's definitely this sense of like, oh, we don't want to see advertisements, but as long as you're being additive and providing something to a gamer's lifestyle or his or her experience, it's usually very well received.
I think on any platform, there's always a resistance to ads at first, right? Think about when anyone on here started using Facebook, what the ad load was compared to what it is now. And of course you get complaints. Of course, anytime you go from no ads to ads, it's going to bother people. But the ad load on something like this is already lighter. It's going to stay lighter. But I think even platforms like Twitch are experimenting with increasing it. So I love what Dave, what Paul, what everybody's saying is this is a risk-reward continuum. And with gamers, I think you're higher up on that continuum. The risk of getting it wrong is severe, but the benefits of getting it right are even higher because you have a deeply engaged, deeply social community. So when you nail it, it amplifies that effect. It takes your paid and turns it into a lot of earned as well.
Absolutely. And along those lines, Nicole, I know that for a little while you were putting out data showing the receptivity of MasterCard's work with League of Legends and whatnot, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about that or another brand that you've done research on about how it's improved the sentiment over time?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that MasterCard example is a great one. So for those on the call that don't know, MasterCard has gotten engaged with the esports scene via primarily League of Legends and has a global partnership with that organization, which is, I think probably indisputably the biggest global esport out there right now. And everything we talked about in terms of doing things the right way, they did everything from, if you talk to kind of the lead over there at MasterCard, he played hours and hours and hours of League of Legends before he ever committed $1 to actually investing in a partnership with them, because he wanted to make sure that from the beginning he knew what he was spending his money on, but also got to kind of get a sense of who are the players, what is the gameplay like, what's happening on the screen, how people talk in this community, all of that. So I think I love that kind of part of the story, because it just shows kind of like the full-on commitment, and they weren't looking for the logo slap. They were looking at this as something long-term, and wanted to make sure they get it right from the beginning. And then, you know, what they also did, and I always, in working with brands, just recommend it, is like, trust your partner, the Riots of the world, the teams, you know, whatever rights holder or partner you're working with probably knows their audience better than anyone. So lean into them. And I think, you know, Riot did a great job in coming to the table with MasterCard and having a lot of great ideas of, here's what you need to do. We don't need a prefab ad that we need to roll and X, Y, and Z programming. We have ideas for how you can do something that's going to make our players excited and engaged. And all the way to the point from, you know, what Paul was mentioning, where it actually made a lot of sense from an endemic standpoint, because gamers are spending money in League of Legends, right? So why, you know, what do you need to do that? A credit card. And when you start to kind of have that conversation with consumers, you know, they probably didn't get that from day one, the fans, but as MasterCard continued to kind of paint that narrative, put out content, send cool boxes to League of Legends streamers for them to open on the air and start to do these things that connected with the community, they were also able to insert that message and have become a, you know, a really successful part of that ecosystem. And the brand KPIs, to your point, Zach, that we've been able to track over time in terms of fans' impression of MasterCard has seen just a direct increase, literally from the time that they signed the deal on. So really great returns from an engagement perspective.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think, you know, to your point, it's great to. I didn't know that part of the story about the guy playing of League before deciding on it. I think that is a really great lesson for any, you know, brands and marketers looking to get involved. Do I think that necessarily League is an easy game to play? So it might be a little tough, but
I don't think he climbed up the ranks, but he put his time in.
You know, I taught one of my friends how to play, and he was like, "Yeah, you guys yelled at me a lot." So there's definitely a learning curve in that respect, but knowing about where you're going to be advertising perspective is definitely a big advantage. And so we've touched on, you know, the good stuff being authentic, it's being experiential, it's tying into the game, it's interactive, and the bad stuff is slapping in a status quo format and whatnot. Dave, Nick, and Paul, you guys all have, through what you're doing at your companies, you have unique approaches, I think, to figuring out the best way to interact with the gamer, right? And so it'd be great if each of you, and why don't we start with Nick, what is Samsung doing to make the experience with gamers and connecting with gamers the good stuff that we just talked about and not the bad stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a couple areas. If you look at how we're enabling brands to connect with gamers, it's through obviously reaching the super qualified gamer, right? And that's through the data and the different sort of, you know, formats and ways you can do that across our TV and mobile platforms, right? So that's sort of one bucket, and that's really making sure we're reaching the right user, you know, with the right message and measuring, you know, the success of that and the areas we can improve on, right, through brand studies and all of those things. And then on the other side of the ecosystem that we're trying to build is, you know, how can we, it's all, you know, really common theme internally is, you know, building affinity with gamers, because Samsung wants to be known as, you know, an endemic brand in gaming. You know, that's sort of their goal. And so how do you build that affinity? One way is to feature more content, whether it's esports or certain types of gaming entertainment programming through our, you know, our services, or whether it's TV Plus or you know, being able to download games and experience games on our platforms. But then additionally, it's through things like you mentioned, really strategic partnerships, whether it's with Fortnite or whether it's with Twitch Rivals, you know, and but aligning the brand of Samsung with the gaming community in a really interesting way. So with Twitch Rivals, For example, that partnership, which was recently announced in the press, the idea there is, Twitch needs to find the next great streamers, right, for Twitch. And Samsung Mobile is going to help in sort of being that exclusive partner to find the next Galaxy heroes. Who are those next great Galaxy heroes playing these really popular games like, Valorant or whatever it might be, and doing it through the lens of Twitch rivals, right? Reaching that really, highly authentic community. And what can we build on from there? And those are conversations that continue in terms of, can we create experiences on the Samsung platform that extend that partnership? I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, great. I appreciate that. Paul, Rival is a particularly unique offering, I think. Talk to us a little bit about that and why you're taking the particular approach that you are.
Yeah, I think, in general, and I'm saying this anecdotally, Nicole and even Tucker may have a little bit better specific data, but I think anecdotally, we all realize that there is a major cross-section between traditional sports and gaming, right? And traditional sports fans who are actually gamers. And so I think one of the reasons something like NBA 2K League exists is how do the traditional sports worlds get to those gamers who, as their audiences are aging out, how do they talk to the younger audiences? And traditionally, I don't know that it's been figured out yet. And so our approach has been very much, let us provide a little bit of your strategy for you of, if you're a Premier League soccer club, an NBA team, an NFL team, and you don't really know how to get to your gaming audience, let us be that solution for you. And we've seen very quick, immediate adoption from these teams' fan bases who say, hey, we just want a game. And I'll be clear, because you hit it on it very well, Zach, at the beginning. It's not necessarily about esports. It's not that very top of the pyramid. It's about a broader gaming audience who says, I'm not looking to join a tournament necessarily. I'm looking to just compete against another fan who also likes, I don't know, Manchester United, whatever it is. And so we've created this world where we can kind of bridge a gap. And then also, as we know, there's been a lot of probably missed opportunities or missed assets during COVID. It also provides those sports franchises an opportunity to use gaming to help with their brand partners, their corporate partners. So a new revenue stream, of course, but the goal really is to build community, knowing that there's a lot of sports fans who are also gamers.
Absolutely. And, brutally, we're coming up on 7 minutes here left. It feels like we just got started. Dave, I want to give you a chance to talk about your angle and the way that you're trying to engage with these gamers. And then there's one other question I want the group before we close out. So Dave, yeah, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, bring us home here. So, there's a lot of ways to interact with gamers, and some of them are in-game and others are kind of around game. And broadcasting and streaming of games, I would consider that more like almost an around game experience. But when we talk about in-game, actually brands interacting with the consumer world, they're playing the game when their hands are on the controller or the mouse or the keyboard, and they're uniquely focused and engaged, and you could jump up and down in front of the TV set and try and get their attention. They don't see you, they look around you. That's the moment that we're at Simon Media, we're focused on helping brands get involved, and that's what I've been kind of focused on for a pretty long time, is figuring out that it's a very tough equation. And it's not an easy conversation to have with game developers, which is, hey, we want to put brands into the moment, into the experience of your gameplay. And we've got some real interesting liftoff now with brands into console, PC, cross-platform games, where the brands are rewarding gamers with in-game content. So the in-game content that these developers are making is part of their live service economy. They've got hundreds of developers building content that they release on a cadence of weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, and the content's incredibly valuable and people spend a lot of money on it. And that's why gaming's now a $200 billion global business. But we're focused on helping unlock that content for free in return for engaging with advertising and brands. And if you look at just historically speaking, streaming services like a Hulu or a Spotify, 70% of their users are coming through their free or ad-supported versions of their businesses. We've surveyed all the big games across all the major publishers, and the vast majority of people playing League of Legends or Valorant or Call of Duty or Fortnite want to get content for free. So that's the market that we're focused on. We're bringing TV quality brands into the experience in a value exchange that players feel good about, that they're in complete control of. And the early partnerships and projects that we're working on are really promising. Players love it. They're not out there complaining about it. In fact, they're saying, thank you for rewarding me with great free stuff. And they get the value exchange, and they're mature enough based on all their media habits they have today to know that there is a potential role for brands to play in gaming as well. So that's what we're really focused on.
Absolutely. And, you know, to close out, I think a lot of people are wondering, and some audience are alluding to this, where's the money going to come from? Right? Everyone's talking about and they have a media mix, right? Is it going to come from TV? Is it digital? Is it sponsored? David, you're the guy with the most money on the panel, I'd say.
It's a great question, and I want to go back to something that was talked about earlier in the webinar. I think Nicole mentioned it: currency. How do we actually take the value of this audience and put it into the dollars and cents, and frankly, GRP, TRP language that so many of our clients currently speak? And that's the major challenge afoot. The way that I would encourage us to think about it, though, is thinking about the end results. When we can show positive use cases where it drives return, I think that's a lot easier to do than try and translate an audience from a fundamentally different platform to a television GRP audience. So I would encourage everyone to think about that. In the short term, though, where does the money come from? Well, I can tell you, going into the upfront this year, the thing that's on the minds of everyone at IPG and Magna is live and live-like experiences. We know that in a world where linear is slipping, no matter the age range, there's still a lot of value in things that are must watch or must talk about, because the timeliness of that content is inherently limited. And so it creates a moment in time for a brand that's very different than all of the connected TV, I'll binge The Office whenever I want sort of situation. And I think I would encourage brands and advertisers to think about esports and gaming in that live and live-like bucket. There's a timeliness to the content that people want to talk about, and therefore you get a greater earned attention for every ad there than you do in something that has a much longer tail of exposure. So in summary, currency is still a big issue to solve. Focus on results and really think about this as being part of your live budget bucket.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you, David. You know, we're about at time here. I know Rick has a brief closing to give. Does anyone throw out anything? You know, I know it feels like we just kind of got into the meat and potatoes. You know, it's tough because there's so much here. Does anyone want to throw out any last kind of closing sentiments before we get back to Rick? Going once, going twice. Rick.
Everybody's talked out. That's hard to believe. Well, thank you so much, everybody in the panel, for sharing some great data, some great perspective, and probably some great inspiration. I mean, it's a lot yet to be done here, and we need creative people and smart people like you all to show us how to get brands engaged, how to get media engaged. And there's a couple of words that just stuck out for me again whenever we think about esports, and that concept of authenticity. And then that kind of gets balanced with the value exchange. So as media people, you know, on all sides of it, the brands, the agencies, media, and the audience, that nexus has to be based on a value exchange. And that's a very, I don't want to say fickle, but a very specific audience that looks at value exchange. They want a different kind of experience out of esports than other kinds of media. And I like the way you said that, David. You kind of framed it as it's a live or live-like experience. I mean, something special about esports that it's a community that you really need to know to get kind of street cred and bona fides there. If you're going to come in, particularly as a non-endemic brand, or if you're in the media trying to bring in that non-endemic money, and having it be more performance-based than trying to redact it back, I guess, to GRPs or sort of standard linear metrics makes a lot of sense too. So I mean, just a lot of wisdom on this panel, a lot of inspiration. thank you again for being part of this. So esports, just a couple of quick takeaways. I mean, I think this last round of questions really drove a lot of very important points home very well, and kind of sensitized some of the people newer to this space as to, wow, you know, this is something I have to learn. I can't just walk into this and start doing things. I really need to be respectful of everything going on here, learn it, figure out who to work with. And so it's these kind of panels that we at BIA are really happy to be able to bring forward to the industry for a little bit of market education, meet some of the driving personalities behind it, and kind of expose everybody to some thinking, maybe some answers, we hope, probably more questions, but that's why we're all here, trying to figure it out and how to move ahead. So we're certainly happy at BIA to sponsor these kinds of forums and work with anybody, you know, to try to make some connections and learn some more about what's going on in this space. We do invite you from some past work we've done in esports. We have a report that is complimentary. Please take a look at that link, download that report, look through it. Hopefully you'll get some value out of it. And I think, next slide, please. Yeah, in the deck, you'll see some examples of how we work with people on a client basis and a thought leadership basis. So there's a few examples on this slide, but please feel free to reach out to me or anybody in the BIA team if you want to learn more about esports or anything really we're doing in the media space from an advisory and strategy perspective. One of the things we're well known for is basic data. I guess I'll raise the data geek flag and say that we too have data geeks on our team, a lot of local market intelligence, ad forecasting trends, things like that. So we'd be delighted to talk more about the kinds of things that we can do to help you out as you look at this space, other spaces in the media business. Next slide. With that, I am going to raise my hand and say thank you again, everybody, for being here. A very great audience.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everyone, so much. And we'll be, you know, audience, I saw some really good audience questions you'll send to the panel. And if they want to answer, then we'll get that. And when we send out the recording to everybody, we'll have that available for you guys. But thanks again for joining. And I hope that you all learned stuff. So beware gamers, but also they're great. So great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.